The wind in Malheur County had a way of scraping the world clean. It blew across the high desert like a giant cold broom, stripping paint off barns and patience out of people. For 4 long years, that same wind carried only one story through the small town of Iraq. 2 young girls had vanished without a single trace. Sarah Jones was 12. Maya Smart was 11. They had biked down a dusty farm road one afternoon, and after that, the world never saw them again. The town fell apart piece by piece. People stopped locking their doors because locking them hadn't helped. Search parties came, then faded. The yellow ribbons tied to fences turned ghost white under the sun. Every lead died. Every hope dried up. The case became a cold stone, lodged in the heart of everyone who lived there. Cliff Burrows had carried that stone longer than most. At 62, he was a quiet rancher who knew more about cattle than people. His face was carved like the canyons he rode, and his hands were shaped to hold reins. He lived alone on a stretch of land that felt too big since his wife passed, and his kids moved away. The only steady voice in his days belonged to his horse, a Palomino gelding he called Bolt. He had bought the horse cheap at an auction in Burns, a sad-looking thing with ribs showing and a long scar under his mane. But the horse had calm eyes, smart eyes, the kind that listened more than most men. Bolt was dependable, steady, and he had never once acted strange. Until that day. It was a sharp October morning, with snow coming down from the mountains and the smell of cold rock in the air. Cliff was riding fence line along the east pasture, heading toward a place locals called Shepherd's Fissure. Most folks avoided it. It was a narrow box canyon, dark even in summer, and it held a quiet that made your skin crawl. Cliff never had reason to go near it. His cattle didn't wander there. But as they rode closer, Bolt suddenly stopped. It wasn't a little stop. It wasn't a stumble or a flinch. He locked all 4 legs like he had been struck by lightning. His nostrils flared wide. His whole body shook. Then he lowered his head toward the canyon and stared hard into the shadows. "Come on, boy," Cliff said, nudging him gently. Bolt didn't move. He took a step backward, ears pinned forward. A low rumble rose in his chest. It wasn't a snort or a whinny. It was fear. Real fear. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. Cliff frowned, and all the time he'd ridden this horse, he had never heard that sound. "You smell a cougar," he muttered. He kicked him harder. Bolt jerked sideways, eyes rolling white. But he still refused to go forward. Instead, he pulled Cliff toward the canyon wall to the right, pacing in tight circles, tugging so hard the reins creaked. "All right," Cliff grumbled. "What's got you spooked?" He slid off the saddle. The moment his boots hit dirt, the horse pushed his head into Cliff's chest in a way he never had before. Then he leaned hard toward the rocks, insisting, almost dragging Cliff with him. Cliff pushed his gloved hands into a thick wall of old juniper branches that grew against the rock. The needles scratched his arms, but he kept pushing until he saw it. Not solid rock, a crack, a narrow, hidden opening no wider than his shoulders, perfectly concealed by trees and shadows. Cliff had ridden this land for 30 years, and he had never noticed it, never even heard a whisper about it. Bolt nudged him again, harder this time. "You want me to look?" Cliff said. He tied the horse to a thick branch. Bolt began pacing again, desperate and restless, staring into the crack like his life depended on what was inside. Cliff swallowed hard. Maybe it was poachers. Maybe it was a mountain lion nest. Or maybe someone was hiding something they didn't want found. He grabbed the heaviest tool on his belt, a fence hammer, and slipped sideways into the dark passage. The crack swallowed him fast. The wind disappeared like it had been cut off with a knife. The air smelled like damp stone. Each step scraped against the basalt walls. 10 feet, 20 feet, then a faint gray light ahead. He stepped out and froze. There was a secret basin tucked between the cliffs, a hidden valley no larger than an acre. The cliffs rose straight up on all sides, trapping the place in a cold stillness that made Cliff's breath feel too loud. And then he smelled it. Wood smoke. Not fresh, not old. Something in between. He scanned the basin and saw a dugout built right into the cliff wall. Its roof was covered in brush to hide it. A tiny solar panel glinted in the fading light. A goat pen stood nearby. This wasn't a camp. This was a home. A hidden home. Cliff crouched behind a boulder, heart thudding. Someone lived here. Someone who didn't want to be found. The heavy dugout door creaked open. A thin girl stepped out holding a bucket. Her hair hung in tangled ropes. Her dress looked stitched from blankets. She moved slow, tired, like she had never run in her life. When she looked up, her eyes met Cliff's. The bucket hit the dirt with a clang. She didn't scream. She just froze, staring at him with wide eyes full of terror so deep Cliff felt it in his bones. "Easy," Cliff whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." Before he could move, the door opened again. A man stepped into the doorway. Cliff's blood went cold. He knew that face. Everyone in the county did. Mark Rogan, leader of the volunteer search and rescue team. The man who had led the search for the missing girls. The man who cried at every press conference. Mark Rogan smiled. "You're trespassing, Cliff," he said calmly, resting a hand on the pistol at his hip. Cliff looked back at the girl, and the truth hit him so hard it knocked the air out of his lungs. Sarah Jones. Alive. She was right here, after 4 years. And Cliff had just walked straight into the hands of the man who stole her. He had to get out. He had to survive. He had to call for help. Or those girls were never leaving this canyon alive. Cliff backed into the shadows of the crack, trying to keep his voice calm, even though his heartbeat felt like it was punching his ribs from the inside. My horse wandered. Cliff said, "Didn't mean to bother anyone. I'll get out of your way now." Mark Rogan didn't raise his pistol. He didn't shout. He didn't look surprised. He only smiled a tight, patient smile that made Cliff's stomach twist. "This is private land," Mark said. "My land." "You shouldn't be here." Cliff kept moving backward, inch by inch, careful not to turn his back, careful not to let panic rush him. When he finally slipped out of sight behind the canyon wall, he turned and scrambled fast through the narrow passage. His boots slipped on the damp rock. The tight space scraped his jacket. A cold dread settled in his gut. The second he reached open air, Bolt cried out. The horse was wild with fear, pulling hard against the reins. Cliff didn't bother untying him. He pulled the knife from his belt and cut the leather in one sharp slice. "Go, boy!" he gasped, jumping into the saddle. Bolt launched forward like his hooves were on fire, galloping over the rocky ground, running as if he already understood how much danger they were in. Cliff didn't dare look back. He just leaned low over the horse's neck and held on. He rode 2 miles to the high ridge, where a single bar of cell service sometimes flickered to life. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. 1 bar, then none, then 1 again. He hit 911 County Dispatch. A woman answered. "What's your emergency?" "This is Cliff Burrows," he said breathlessly. "Get Sheriff Brody. Now. It's the girls. The missing girls." A moment later, Brody's rough voice came on the line. "Cliff? What's going on?" "They're alive," Cliff said. Sarah Jones and Maya Smart. "They're alive. I found them." A long silence followed, full of disbelief. "Found who?" "Cliff, you're breaking up. What are you talking about?" "The girls," Cliff said louder. "Rogan has them. Mark Rogan. He's been hiding them in a dugout. He's armed." Another long pause. Brody's tone changed. The disbelief didn't disappear, but it twisted into something else. "Fear? Where are you exactly?" "The high pasture east of Shepherd's Fissure," Cliff said. "But Brody, he'll see you coming. You need to be careful." "We're on our way," Brody said. "Stay put, don't move, and keep that phone alive." The line clicked dead. Cliff looked back toward the hidden canyon. The sun was low now, bleeding red across the desert. Bolt trembled beneath him. The horse wasn't just scared, he was focused. His ears pointed back toward the fissure like he was listening to someone calling his name. An hour later, the high desert was no longer quiet. Flashing lights lit the rocks. Sirens echoed through the deep cut of the canyon. Tire tracks carved into the sagebrush. Deputies and tactical teams gathered near the entrance of Shepherd's Fissure. A helicopter thumped low overhead, but even it couldn't see into the hidden basin. Brody stood at the front with binoculars, his jaw tight, his face pale. "He built a fortress in my county," Brody muttered, shaking his head, "and we never even knew." "He knew the land better than anyone," Cliff said quietly. "He led the search parties. He knew where people would look." Brody swallowed hard. His voice dropped. "I had coffee with that man. I called him a hero." Before Cliff could answer, Brody lifted a bullhorn and spoke into it. "Mark Rogan, this is Sheriff Brody. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands empty and unharmed. Send the girls out now." The canyon swallowed the echo. Silence. Then a high cracked shot ripped across the canyon, striking rock 20 feet from Brody and exploding into dust. Deputies dove behind trucks. The helicopter pulled up fast. "He's got a firing port." A deputy yelled. "He planned for this." Inside the hidden basin, the gunshot shook the ground. Maya dropped to the dirt, covering her ears with both hands. Sarah backed against the wall, her breath shaking. Mark slammed the dugout door shut and grabbed his rifle. "They're coming to take you," he shouted. "We have to hold them back." "You shot at them," Sarah said, her voice trembling to protect you. Mark answered, his voice rising. "The world out there is poison. They want to hurt you. I saved you. I saved both of you." Sarah's eyes filled with anger. She had been quiet for so long. She had tried not to fight him. But now the truth was bursting through the lies like sunlight through broken boards. "You lied," Sarah said. Mark froze. "What did you say?" "You lied," Sarah repeated, louder this time. He wasn't a threat. He was just an old man. Back outside, the night grew colder. Cliff watched Brody's team crouch behind cruisers and trucks, talking fast, trying to plan something. Anything that wouldn't get the girls killed. Cliff felt useless, too old, too slow, too late. Bolt pulled hard against the reins again, pacing. He kept whining that same low, anxious call, staring at the crack like he needed to get back inside. Something sparked in Cliff's mind. He walked fast to Brody Sheriff. He said, "Let me send in the horse." Brody blinked at him. "You want to do what?" "He's the one who found them," Cliff said, "not me." Bolt knew they were in there. "He's scared," Brody said. "He's pacing because he wants to run." "No," Cliff said firmly. "He's looking for someone." Brody stared at him like he wanted to argue, but they were out of time, out of options. If they charged in, the girls would die. If they waited, Rogan might panic and do something terrible. "You're a crazy old man, Cliff," Brody said finally. "But go ahead." Cliff didn't wait. He ran to Bolt, undoing the reins with shaking fingers. "I don't know who you're looking for," Cliff whispered, pressing his forehead to the horse's warm face. "But you go find her." He pulled the halter off. Then he slapped Bolt hard on the flank. "Go!" Bolt spun and galloped straight into the narrow crack without a moment's hesitation. Brody watched, stunned. "I can't believe he actually went," he muttered. Inside the basin, Mark was yelling now. His words sounded like static, wild and broken. Then a sound rose through the cliffs. A horse's cry. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that sound. She knew it, like she knew her own heartbeat. "No," she whispered. She pushed past Mark, threw open the door of the dugout, and stepped into the open basin. The Palomino stood there, sides heaving, eyes wild, pacing as if searching for only one thing. Sarah took one shaky step. "Sundown," she whispered. The horse froze. His ears shot forward. Then he whinnied, a deep, trembling sound full of recognition and relief, and barreled straight to her, pressing his head into her chest so hard it nearly knocked her over. Her hands flew into his mane, her knees buckled, her whole world cracked open. It was her horse, her foal, her Sundown. And that moment broke the last, fragile piece of Mark Rogan's control. Sarah turned toward the dugout, tears running down her dusty face. "You lied to me," she screamed. Then she looked up at the cliffs. "We're here," she shouted. "Help US. He has US. We're here." Outside, Brody whipped around toward the sound that was her. Brody said, "That was Sarah!" Quote. He grabbed his radio now. He ordered all teams, "Breach!" And the canyon erupted into chaos. The moment Sarah's scream cut through the canyon, Brody's team moved fast. Deputies rushed toward the hidden crack, shields up, boots pounding against the rock. A small explosive charge was planted at the dugout door. The team waited for the signal. Inside the basin, Mark Rogan spun around, confused and furious. The rifle trembled in his hands. He didn't know where to point it first. At the horse, at Sarah, or at the shouting outside. "You don't understand." Mark cried, his voice breaking. "I saved you. I kept you safe from the world. I protected you." Sarah stood between him and the horse, her hands gripping Sundown's mane. Her legs were shaking, but her voice didn't shake at all. "You stole us," she said. "You lied to us." Maya clung to the back wall, her hands over her ears, silently sobbing. She was terrified of Mark. She had been under his control for 4 long years, and every piece of her still flinched at his voice. Outside, Brody gave the signal, "Breach!" The explosive blew the dugout door off its hinges. A flashbang rolled inside and detonated with a blinding burst of light and thunder. Mark staggered back, dropping the rifle as deputies stormed in. 3 officers tackled him at once, pinning him to the floor. "Get down! Hands behind your back!" Mark screamed as they cuffed him. "I'm their protector! You can't take them! They belong to me!" But it was over. 2 deputies wrapped Maya in a blanket and carried her out. She shook like a leaf, unable to understand the noise, the lights, the sudden chaos. Sarah refused to leave without Sundown, her hands locked into the horse's mane like she'd glued herself there. Sundown stayed beside her, every step slow and careful, protecting her the way he had always meant to. When Sarah finally stepped into the open canyon, the flashing police lights painted her pale face red and blue. She blinked hard, overwhelmed by the world outside after so many years in the dark. Cliff stood nearby, holding Bolt's empty halter with trembling hands. Sarah stopped in front of him. She looked at Cliff, then at Sundown, then back again. She didn't say a word. She just held onto her horse like he was the only thing keeping her upright. And in a way, he was. The rescue spread like wildfire. News vans filled A-Rock's single road. Reporters shoved cameras through the hospital doors in Burns. Families cried. Deputies stood guard. The whole county seemed to hold its breath. The truth came out piece by piece. Mark Rogan wasn't driven by greed or violence. He was driven by a twisted belief that the world was doomed. He convinced the girls the outside was dangerous. He told them their families were gone. He hid them in a bunker, disguised as a survival shelter. And while the town searched for them, he led those searches. He planted fake clues. He faked tracks. He controlled everything. He kept their bikes, their school bags, their clothes tucked away like relics from a world he claimed no longer existed. But one question confused investigators more than anything. How did the horse know? How did a Palomino ranch horse, bought cheap at auction, lead a man straight into the hidden canyon where the girls were trapped? The answer came quietly. Cliff was sitting in the hospital waiting room, holding a cup of vending machine coffee he couldn't bring himself to drink. Sarah's father, John Jones, sat beside him, his face hollow from 4 years of grief. "That horse of yours," John said softly, staring through the window at Cliff's stock trailer outside. "He looks familiar." Cliff followed his gaze. Sundown stood tied to the trailer, refusing to touch the hay Cliff had given him. The horse kept watching the hospital doors, waiting. "My Sarah had a foal, John," said a Palomino, "born on our farm. She named him Sundown because of that bright gold streak in his mane. She raised him from birth. After she went missing, after we lost everything, we had to sell him. I don't know who bought him. I thought he was gone. Cliff felt the world tilt under him. He remembered the auction. The thin, quiet Palomino no one else wanted. The gold streak in his mane. The sad eyes. The way he'd stood still when Cliff touched him. The name Cliff had given him. Bolt. Cliff swallowed hard, John. He said in a rough voice, "I think that's Sundown." John's breath caught. He covered his mouth, eyes filling with tears. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was something deeper. Sundown hadn't been pulling Cliff toward danger. He had been pulling him toward Sarah. He had spent 2 years waiting, working quietly on Cliff's ranch, listening to the desert winds for the one scent he never forgot, the scent of the girl who raised him. When he caught it, he didn't stop. He refused to leave that canyon until Cliff listened. The horse didn't find the girls. He found his girl. The aftermath changed everything. Mark Rogan went to prison for life. A rock turned its anger into something better, something healing. Maya needed years of therapy. Her world had been shattered, rebuilt, and shattered again. But she wasn't alone anymore. Sarah slowly grew stronger. She no longer flinched at loud sounds. She no longer woke up screaming. Every day she spent brushing Sundown's coat or walking beside him brought her a little closer to herself. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Cliff drove his trailer to John Jones's new place. He carried a single paper in his hand. "I can't afford him," John said. "We can't." "You're not buying him," Cliff said, "and you're not taking him. He's going home." He handed John the signed transfer papers. Sundown was Sarah's horse. He always had been. Cliff didn't lose the horse that day. He gained something else. He found himself visiting the Jones family more than he stayed on his own ranch. The empty silence of his home felt wrong now. He found purpose again, teaching, helping, showing Maya how to hold a lead rope, showing Sarah how to ride again without fear. Soon the whole town joined in. They built something together, something new, a small barn, a riding arena, a sign carved by hand. Sundown Ranch, Equestrian Therapy Center. It was built for healing, for courage, for second chances, for kids who needed a safe place to learn to breathe again. On opening day, the barn smelled of fresh pine and sweet hay. Sundown stood quietly while Sarah brushed his golden coat. Maya perched on the fence rail watching him, nervous but curious. Cliff stood beside her, holding a soft, new lead rope. "You see this?" Cliff said gently. "You don't pull. You just invite him. Be kind. Be steady. He'll come to you." He held out the rope. Maya hesitated, her hands shaking. She looked at Sarah. Sarah smiled and nodded. Maya took the rope. Sundown lifted his head. He looked at the girl holding the line. Then he stepped forward, slow and gentle, until he was close enough for her to touch. A bond began, quiet and fragile, but real. Cliff felt something warm fill his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. The horse hadn't only found the girls. He had brought them home. He had healed a broken father. He had given a lost rancher a new purpose. He had repaired a town torn apart by fear. In the harshest land, where secrets hide in the rocks and the wind feels colder than truth, a horse with a memory stronger than fear found the one thing no one else could: hope.